Đây là The Conductor, một podcast của Zing, nơi đưa tới góc nhìn của người trong nghề về thị trường, kinh doanh và cách vận hành doanh nghiệp. Tôi là Thủy Tiên và khách mời ngày hôm nay là Managing Director của Heineken Việt Nam, Alexander Koch.
Hi, I'm Alexander Koch. I'm the Managing Director of Heineken Việt Nam and very excited to be here this afternoon.
Let me introduce myself first. I'm Tiên. You can call me T. I'm the second runner-up of Miss Universe Vietnam 2022, and I'll be your host today.
Thank you, T. That's a great honor. I'm Alex.
Okay. So how long have you been in Vietnam, and how do you feel about our country and its people?
Wow. I've been in Vietnam 4 years now, a bit over 4 years. And I must say it's been an amazing 4 years, despite the fact that 50% has been somewhat disrupted by COVID. But I'm truly inspired by Vietnam, and I'm not saying this to be polite to you and the listeners, but I truly believe Vietnam has an amazing momentum going on. I think we can actually see it around us, where everything that's being built. So you can literally hear and feel the growth here in Vietnam, which I find very inspiring. I've been working in Africa before. Coming
Africa.
here, I've been working in Europe, obviously. I'm a Dutch national, but here you really see the momentum is happening. You have a significant middle class and still growing. You have a very young and dynamic population that are extremely passionate, driven, committed, a lot of fun and positive energy, which I find truly inspiring, not only working here, but also living here. I'm here with my family, my wife and 3 daughters, although my eldest now started her university in the UK, in London. But we all enjoy Vietnam very much.
Yeah, I can see that Vietnam is such a warm country, and you live here for 4 years. What do you find is the most interesting thing in Vietnam?
Ooh, the most interesting, many interesting things. Well, I've been working 25 years for Heineken, so
25 years for
25
Heineken?
years, yes.
Wow.
So what struck me when I came here is that people put ice in their beer.
Yes.
So I remember when I heard about this, I said, guys, nobody is going to put ice in my beer. That's not how we drink beer. Obviously, I'm now largely addicted to this Vietnamese way of drinking beer, so I love it with a big rock of ice. It keeps it cold and refreshing, but that's something that surprised me when I came here. But maybe on a more deeper level, what I find inspiring is what I think is the mission of Vietnam, which is freedom, independence and happiness. And especially that last word is, I think, something that is really resonating in Vietnam. So people have this positive energy, this no matter how difficult situations sometimes can be, there is always this search for happiness and positive energy. These moments are sometimes celebrated with a beer, which is of course great for us. But I find that notion of happiness or positive energy, you can also say it's positive energy. I find that really inspiring and good. I think the world needs a bit more positivity and drive for happiness as we see it here in Vietnam.
Yeah, actually when you mentioned about putting ice in beer, I remember that every time I drank beer, we would put ice into it. It would be weird if we don't drink beer with ice, because it would be more refreshing and it tastes lighter for me, and I really like to have beer with ice.
Yeah, no, I'm now also used for it. So even when I go back to Holland, I sometimes put beer in ice in my beer.
So the foreigners, they don't use ice with beer?
No.
Oh,
no. So
really?
if I would talk to our brewmasters outside of Vietnam, they would say it's almost an insult to put ice in your beer.
Really?
Because it changes the balance. But no, it is the way we enjoy it here, and it stays nice and fresh. And actually, funny enough, it inspired us to develop a new Heineken, which is known as Heineken Silver here in Vietnam.
Yeah.
This was a beer that was developed by our local Vietnamese brewmaster. It is honestly the first time that the Heineken family, Heineken is still a family-owned business, allowed for a change in recipe. Mm-hmm. And after the success of Heineken Silver in Vietnam, it is now being launched in more than 30 countries all over the world. So that is a very proud fact for us, the Heineken team here in Vietnam.
I really admire that you are the managing director of Heineken, And it's been 2 years. You said that 50% of your years in Vietnam has been dubbed by COVID-19. So how did you let your team through such challenges?
Well,
It was such a tough time.
That's a good question. It was a tough time. And ironically enough, so Heineken Vietnam, we celebrated our 30th anniversary in last year, in 2021. And ironically, it was the first year that we did not grow. So our history has been very successful, a history of constant growth. But of course, last year it was difficult, to say the least. So, and unfortunately, there's no manual for how to lead a company through COVID, right? We had to take the situation as it came. But there's a few lessons that I took from it. The first lesson would be people first. That's what we did. So the business, of course, was heavily impacted. There was a lot of uncertainties about what COVID could mean for the health of our colleagues, the people, their families. So we really put people and the safety of our staff as a first priority. So that was a very clear guiding principle that we had as a management team. Then also the notion of communication is critical. If you're in a crisis, you need to have very short and direct lines of communication. So we spend a lot of time informing and having dialogues with our colleagues, which all was online. As we now know, the working digitally is something that I think may be a good spin-off of COVID. Also, as a management team, we had daily meetings, check-ins to take the situation step by step. And also we decided to empower our colleagues. And I think under difficult circumstances, people get creative. So our business, obviously, especially in the South, was almost completely shut down. But by empowering our commercial teams, for example, they came up with very inventive ways to do online sales. So a lot of new ideas actually bubbled up from empowering the teams. So first learning, people first, strong communication and empowerment. Then the second learning is the notion of self-care. It's a bit like if you take Vietnam Airlines on the safety video, you will hear when they talk about the oxygen mask, first put it on yourself before you put it on
your friends,
your children or somebody else. So it is very important that if you need to care for somebody, you first take care of yourself. So keep yourself strong and healthy to make sure you're able to support the team. So that's something that I also very consciously did for myself, to keep myself mentally sane. Okay, there were not a lot of opportunities, of course, in the lockdown, but my few times daily walk with the dog around the house helped me to balance off, and also stimulated our colleagues to take care of themselves before they can take care of their teams. So then the third lesson, I think, don't lose energy on things you cannot influence. So a situation like COVID, it is just happening to the world. And as a managing director of Heineken Vietnam, I cannot change COVID. So don't lose energy fighting the pandemic or government regulations, because that is beyond your control. So focus on what you can control, and that is keeping always an eye on the longer term. So obviously we have a strategy at Heineken Vietnam, which was temporarily disrupted. So we needed to be agile by dealing with the daily disruptions. But we never lost sight on our long-term ambition. And actually, funny enough, if I look back now, we have never launched more innovations, new products like Beer Viet, Edelweiss, Tiger Platinum. We never launched more new products the last 2 years than the years before. So we've continued our innovation despite all the challenges. So that would be my third lesson, to keep the eye on the long term, be agile to deal with the daily disruptions, but stick to your plan.
Wow, I'm really surprised by your sharing about Heineken. You know, a few years ago when I was a university student, we always dream of getting a job in Heineken. It is so hard to pass on the MT, management trainee program. Yeah, it would be my dream at that time. Heineken is such a nice place, and what you share about the strategies, the 3 steps, it is interesting. And I'm curious about how Heineken Vietnam emerged from COVID, because you know COVID is still around us. And like you shared, there is no case study, there's no textbook instruction for us to follow on. So how can you did it?
Well, first of all, thanks for your sharing on how you see Heineken Vietnam as a company to join. That's, I think, a big responsibility that we have, and something we take serious, that we really want to be an attractive employer for talented Vietnamese people who are more than welcome to join us, obviously. But then, so thanks for that, T. Back to your question. So how did we bounce back after COVID?
Yep.
Maybe before I answer that question, let's take a moment to zoom out to the state the world is in now. Because COVID is, okay, it's still there, let's be honest, but it's become luckily more of a regular virus than something that is greatly disrupting businesses. But if you zoom out and see what's happening in the world, and I don't want to be a pessimist, I consider myself an optimist, there are quite a few disruptions going on. If you look at geopolitically what's happening in Europe with the war between Russia and Ukraine, tensions with the US and Russia, tensions also with China, looking at Taiwan. So geopolitically the situation is very turbulent. There is a recession on the horizon if it's not already happening. There is climate change, big climate disasters being reported from all corners in the world. So the world is going through turbulence. And again, to my earlier point, this is something that is happening, and we can't, or we can only partially influence this. I think on climate we need to do much better as humanity to take this very serious, and
Definitely
we try to do that at Heineken Vietnam. Maybe we'll discuss that later. So back to COVID. I think Vietnam honestly did an impressive job in dealing with the virus. First of all, 2020, when the world was locked down, we were still free to go. 21 was a tough year for people and businesses in Vietnam, but then vaccination came up to speed quite rapidly. And it is, again, amazing to see, and that comes back to my earlier point on how I see Vietnam, how resilient this economy and the Vietnamese people bounced back after the pandemic. So at Heineken Vietnam, we have this symbol, which is the V for Vietnam,
V,
where
Vietnam.
you can say that it actually bounces back stronger than where we came from. So it's not this V, but it is the V where we bounce back. And I think that is truly what's happening. So if we look at our industry, the on-trade is open. People are going out again. They're enjoying social lives, true togetherness over a beer again. So our business bounced back strongly, also helped by the fact that what I just shared, we continue to innovate during COVID. So the business has proven to be very resilient, like life in Vietnam. Another important part in the, let's say, dealing with COVID and bouncing back after COVID is your supply chain resilience. So we have 6 breweries in Vietnam. We're operating 6 breweries. Which during the lockdowns all remained somewhat operational, because a brewery you cannot switch off. The beer is constant in a different phase of fermentation, lagering. So it was critical for us to keep the operations going, and we had actually people sleeping at the brewery for weeks, which I thought was a very humbling and inspiring example of how committed our Heineken Vietnam colleagues were. And actually in many other factories in Vietnam, people had to stay inside, keep the operations going. But then after Vietnam reopened, we went from 0 to hero almost overnight. So we had to scale up our operations quite quickly. And actually only 2 weeks ago, we had the Heineken family and our global CEO, our regional president, here with us to open our expanded Vung Tau brewery, where we can now produce 11 million hectoliters, which is almost 1 in 4 beers consumed in Vietnam can be brewed in our Vung Tau brewery, which is the biggest brewery in Southeast Asia. Okay, I'm gonna sound I'm a bit boasting now, but it's all true facts. We have the highest speed canning lines in Asia as well, 130,000 cans per hour per line. So we can do 12 million cans in a day in that brewery.
12 million cans.
Yeah, so it's quite
day?
mind-blowing. Yeah, and we're actually already thinking about how to expand further. So that in answer to your question, how resilient the bounce back in Vietnam is, it is quite remarkable.
Wow.
And also, it is one of the greenest breweries in Asia, in the world. So the most water efficient. We have managed to set up a whole business ecosystem around the brewery where, for example, the biomass that we use for the heat comes from across the street. The cans are produced only 2 kilometers away from us, so it's a very sustainable ecosystem, and we wanted to be the first carbon neutral brewery in the world. So we have high commitment on sustainability in that brewery.
Well, I love to hear the word sustainability because not many can do it.
I think maybe a few years back, sustainability was a bit of a, if I can say so, a corporate hygiene factor for many companies that just felt they needed to put the tick in the boxes. I dare to say at Heineken Vietnam we have a true sustainable commitment. We've been selected top 3 most sustainable company in Vietnam for 6 years in a row now. And our ambition obviously doesn't stop there. And sustainability is easier said than done. So it is hard work, but yeah, we must take care of Vietnam. We believe in growing together with Vietnam. We must take care of the planet. So yeah, we have a big obligation to ourselves, our children and the next generations to get this right.
So earlier you mentioned about taking care of yourself so you can be able to taking care of others, especially your teams. I know that being a managing director, you don't have much time for yourself. So how can you balance both both your work and your life? I'm really curious about that.
Well, that is a challenge sometimes. And after 25 years Heineken, and I've worked in many different countries, I can honestly say Vietnam is a different ball game altogether, because here it is fast-paced, intense, high energy, so you need to take care of yourself. I must say that I also get a lot of energy from working in Vietnam, but I think self-care has to do with 2 aspects. It's a healthy mind and a healthy body. Mm-hmm. In order to do my job well, I need to consider my job somewhat as a high-level sport, so you need to make sure you stay in shape. I spend a lot of evenings in the market with colleagues or having dinners with other business leaders. I'm traveling an awful lot in Vietnam, so you need to make sure that first of all your mind finds peace of mind. So mental health is important. Again, here for me, a positive mindset is an important thing. I was reading an interesting book the other day, which I think is something very close to my heart. It's called The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker. And what he writes in this, it's an easy to read book. I can recommend it to your listeners. Mm-hmm. And it turns around a well-known notion that many people think that you need to work hard to be successful, to get rich, and then when all of that materialized, you will be happy. So happiness as the result of hard work, wealth, etc. What the book does is he turns it around. Mm-hmm. In order to be successful, it starts with happiness. And happiness you can also read as positivity, a positive mindset. And that's something that I truly believe. I truly believe in, if you have a positive intention on things, you are able to generate positive energy or unleash energy in a team. And when you unleash that energy in a team, a business will thrive and become more successful. So a positive mindset, positive energy is something that is important for me. I also, to keep myself sane, I like to listen to heavy metal music. Not a lot of people understand that, but for me it is soothing to my brain to listen to quite intense rock music.
That is strange.
Yeah, it's a bit
that is
strange, right?
Usually when they need to relax, we listen to like pop, ballad or opera. In your
No,
case?
I can perfectly work in my zone listening to heavy rock music.
Wow.
And that started in my youth. I'm a child of the 80s. So I was listening to all these 80s rock, and my parents thought this was just a puberty thing. But okay, I believe I'm maybe then still in my puberty. So I'm still listening to this type of music. So I run a lot also, or I walk listening to podcasts. To keep my mind healthy. And honestly, I also get a lot of energy from going out in the trade where people enjoy a beer, go to a guanyao with our colleagues, or go to Bouivien for some crazy noise and happiness. So I do get energy from energetic people around me, and there's a lot of energetic people in Vietnam.
And that sounds like an ideal job when you can both do your job, which is field research, and you can also have a beer on the street.
It is.
That is ideal.
That's the good part of working at Heineken. Yeah, it's work hard, but then since we sell beer or togetherness or happiness, there is always this good aspect of enjoying a beer with your consumers, with your colleagues, with your distributors, your business partners, as a part of your work.
Oh, okay. So last but not least, I'm pretty sure a lot of audience from Zing podcast would like to hear from you. What have you learned from your younger employees? Because for me, like I said before, having a chance to work at Heineken Việt Nam is such a dream for university student. You definitely work a lot with younger employees.
Yeah.
So what have you learned from them?
That's a very good question. Thank you for that. And I don't know whether this makes me feel old or young, but
you're still 18, like you mentioned
in
earlier.
music, yeah. No, what I think is important. So there are different generations, obviously. And for example, at Heineken Vietnam, I believe now 75% of our workforce is millennial, and then we have the Gen Z coming in right now. So what I intentionally do is I really try to understand the different generations and how they see things, how they see working at Heineken Vietnam, or how they see their professional career in general. So I spend quite a lot of time engaging with our colleagues. I'm curious to hear from them. We organize sometimes coffee sessions, or I meet them, what we were just describing, out for a beer. So I think it is very important to stay relevant as a manager like myself, to be able to understand what's driving your colleagues or the generations, to answer your questions, or the younger generation. So I do spend a lot of time engaging with them, listening to their views, but also trying to express, for example, my view, my generation view, because I think where true cooperation can flourish is that people give and take. We understand each other's point of view, and then we find a truth somewhere in the middle. So I really like that engagement. We talk a lot about Gen Z. I think in general now, in the press, in businesses, Gen Z is coming in. I was reading an interesting article the other day about Gen Z, which is referred to as the true generation, because they are the first digital native, fully digital native generation. They also truly believe that everything can be solved in dialogue, which I think is an interesting notion, and they don't stick labels on people or things. They're very open-minded. When it comes to having things, they want to have access to goods, but they don't want to own it. Whereas, for example, in my time, I was owning, and now I'm very old, videos or DVDs. Now you don't own them, you go to Netflix and you stream it. You don't own heavy metal albums anymore, you go to Spotify to listen to the latest release. You don't need a car anymore because you're gonna go for a ride-hailing service such as Grab. So it is very important how the generation comes to shape. My three daughters are all Gen Z, so as a parent I also need to understand. We have a lot of discussions at the dinner table, which I really enjoy. It gives me a lot of information as well. So yeah, it is important to actively engage as a manager from another generation. So this I could recommend to any manager, to engage on this dialogue and seek to understand, but also stay true to your own perspective, because we just need to acknowledge that different generations emerged from different moments in time in history.
I'm pretty sure that your younger employees are honored to learn from you. That's my side.
I try. I
That's
mean,
my
it's
thinking.
important to stay relevant to them, and I hope I can support them to grow. I hope I can help them develop themselves, and for sure I can learn a lot from them as well. So it's an exciting interaction.
So Alex, thank you so much for joining us today, and I love your sharing about Heineken Vietnam as well as your job and what Heineken Vietnam is doing. And thank you for joining our podcast, and I'm sure that the audience will like it.
I hope so, and thank you, T, for having me and all your very interesting questions that made me think hard. But I really enjoyed our little conversation here today. Thank you so much.
Okay.